Alrighty, guys, I feel like we've gotten a pretty decent idea of where James Gunn's DCU is heading story-wise over the next few years, over the next few movies and shows. We got a pretty good indication of this in Peacemaker Season 2, and James Gunn has confirmed as much, saying that Salvation, and also Checkmate, the organization now comprised of Adebayo, Hardcore, Judah Master, Flurry Economos, all of the people, the main characters, the main good guys, if you will, from Peacemaker Season 2. Obviously, spoiler alert, sans Chris Smith as Peacemaker, who is stuck on Salvation. So those things are going to be very important for the DCU in the future. And a lot of speculation has come out of that because Salvation, as a concept in the DC universe, is based on a comic book run called Salvation Run, ironically, that James Gunn has said he's really enjoyed it, and it's clear that he's taken a lot of inspiration from the comic book run where Viola Davis, in the DCU, Viola Davis, but Amanda Waller takes a lot of the metahumans and says, look, they're just escaping from prison as fast as we can put them there in Arkham and Belle Reve, so let's put them in this alternate dimension where they're going to call it Salvation and see what happens there. So that's obviously inspiration for where the DCU is heading, and we'll see more of that in Man of Tomorrow, I'm sure. And Brainiac probably will be a part of that, just based on the teases that we've seen before. That being said, a lot of the speculation has turned to who the villain might be, or who the villains might be, given that Salvation Run is a big inspiration for the DCU. And one of the things about Salvation Run is that a lot of it deals with things like boom tubes and DARKSEID. DARKSEID being the Thanos equivalent, or you could say Thanos is the DARKSEID equivalent in Marvel and DC. Basically, the big guy. You saw him a little bit in Zack Snyder's Justice League. He is the villain who is looking for the anti-life equation in the DC comics and in the DC universe, and he's kind of big and kind of gray and looks like Thanos. So again, they're based on one another. I think Thanos was actually he came later after DARKSEID, but they're kind of similar characters. Now they occupy similar spaces in each universe. I would say DARKSEID is a very big presence, and you don't use him lightly. I would think you don't use him as a character in a spin-off TV show, for example. I would think at the very least. However, because of all this, there's been speculation that DARKSEID is going to be the big villain of the DCU because Salvation Run has a lot to do with DARKSEID and what he is after. But James Gunn, recently in an interview with a bunch of YouTube channels, including New Rockstars and Screen Crush, has confirmed that DARKSEID is not going to be the big villain of the DCU. Now, that doesn't mean that he can't appear in future projects. In fact, I think that it is pretty possible that he would appear, almost like he does in Harley Quinn, which is obviously a very different show. But Harley Quinn is not necessarily, I mean, it could be, and it might be. But as far as I know, it's not necessarily interested in having DARKSEID be a big villain, but he does show up here and there. And characters related to DARKSEID and Boom Tubes and Parademons do show up in Harley Quinn. But obviously the last season was focused on Brainiac, and maybe that is a cue that James Gunn would take. Not consciously, perhaps, but, it's a similar path that James Gunn might be going on, where DARKSEID could show up, potentially, but he might not be the main villain of the DCU. And that's confirmed now. Why I think this is a good thing, and actually James Gunn himself said so during this interview, is really just, it's twofold, and he said both of those things during the interview, but really the big reason is that it's been done. It just was done. Zack Snyder's big vision for the DCEU was DARKSEID. That was his whole thing. That was the big linchpin. If you watch the Snyder Cut of Justice League, which, to be fair, I like a lot more than the theatrical cut, DARKSEID is a big presence, and Zack Snyder has talked about his plans for the future movies, and how DARKSEID, you saw the future visions in the Snyder Cut with the apocalypse and everything like that, and you saw a flashback scene with DARKSEID getting the anti-life equation. So all of those things, right, all of those things were being set up in Zack Snyder's DCEU. It's not been done necessarily, but it was the original big plan for the previous iteration of DC. So I think that is a big reason, and James Gunn said it himself, that it's been done, and Zack Snyder just did that, basically. So I actually think, as when this speculation first started to happen, I was like, well, wait a second, though. Does James Gunn really want to just do what Zack Snyder was going to do anyways? That's going to make a lot of people angry. It's going to make a lot of people not confused, but maybe hesitant about what's happening with DC, and I think that it's smart. It's a smart thing to stray away from it. The secondary reason, though, that he brought up, and I think that this is also true, is that it doesn't really matter in the comics who came first, DARKSEID or Thanos. In the movies, Thanos, obviously, made a much larger impression on most people than DARKSEID ever will, because Thanos came first, and Thanos was part of two incredible pop culture events in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. In fact, a pop culture phenomenon that spanned over 10 years, arguably, in the Infinity Saga. So to do a character that is, let's be honest, and it is reductionist, it is generalization, but just on face value, to do a big bad villain that is pretty similar to Thanos, just again, a surface level, baseline, pretty similar to Thanos, I think is not the best idea for the DCU. So I'm actually pretty glad that James Gunn has confirmed that Darkseid is not going to be the big villain. Again, I would be shocked if we don't see him in some form or fashion, but I just don't think that that's the direction we're going in. Now, the question of who is the big villain, I have no idea. Could it be Brainiac? Sure, could be. It could be any number of characters, and I just frankly, I don't have the expertise or the knowledge with DC Comics to know. And if you guys have thoughts and if you guys have ideas of who this big villain might be based on the DCU thus far and based on the comics, let me know in the comments. But guys, what do you think about the fact that Darkseid has been confirmed to not be the big villain of the DCU? Let me know in the comments down below.